Hello, everybody, and welcome to my presentation on John Muir, Citizen of the Universe. Here we see a picture of John Muir as a young man. In his life, he was many things. He was a farmer, an inventor, sheep herder, naturalist, explorer, writer, and conservationist of forests. John was born in Dunbar, Scotland on April 21st, 1838. He lived there with his family until he was 11 years old, and then in 1849 they immigrated to the United States. At first they settled at Fountain Lake, but after a little while they ended up moving to Hickory Hill Farm in Wisconsin. While growing up, John's dad was very strict. He was a pious man, and he forced John to memorize the Bible. He'd always work them from dusk till dawn on the farm. But during breaks, John and his brothers would explore the fields and the woods of their countryside. It was at this time of his life that he really found his admiration for nature. Among many things, John Muir was also an inventor. He especially enjoyed making mechanisms out of wood. Some of the things that he invented were clocks that kept accurate time, and even a machine that rolled kids out of the bed in the morning, called the early rising machine. It was in 1860 that Muir decided to take his inventions to the Madison State Fair, and he actually won a lot of prizes. Then, in 1861, he decided to enroll in the University of Wisconsin. During the time there, he was studying science, but what he really wanted to do was study plants. Of course, his real intentions were to study medicine, but studying medicine actually interrupted his ability to invent things. Now, John only stayed in college for 3 years until he decided to go exploring the United States and Canada. While exploring, John worked odd jobs to help him pay his way through life. As I said, in 1864, John Muir decided to go on an exploration. He began exploring the northern United States, as well as Canada. Of course, during his exploration voyage, he had to work odd jobs here and there to make sure that he kept himself fed. And in 1867, he found a job at a carriage part shop in Indianapolis. It was during his employment there that he suffered a severe eye injury that almost left him blind for the rest of his life. After this industrial accident, he decided to turn his focus onto what he truly loved in life, and that was God's creations. It was during this time, after he had made his life-altering decision, that he began his 1,000-mile walk from Indianapolis to the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, during his journey, he kept a small journal on him, which he made a log every day, and in 1916, it would finally be published into a book titled A 1,000-Mile Walk to the Gulf. When John arrived in the Gulf of Mexico, his journey did not end there. He then sailed to Cuba, and then from Cuba to Panama, and finally cut across to the west coast where he landed in San Francisco in 1868. After arriving in San Francisco, John began his voyage to Yosemite Valley. Along the way, he walked across the San Joaquin Valley, which was said to be filled with millions of wildflowers, and from there he went into the high mountains for the first time. While in Yosemite, the scenery instantly ensnared Muir. He took a job as a sheep herder, making $30 a month. He loved Yosemite so much that he built a pine cabin next to a stream so that the sound of running water would help him sleep at night. It was here in Yosemite that he found living glaciers, and it dawned on him that the valley was carved due to glaciation. While in Yosemite, John would take time to go out and study the Sierra Nevadas. During that time, he wrote many articles, where they actually titled Studies in the Sierra. It was these articles that helped his career kick off as a writer. Shortly after his time in the Sierras, he decided to move to Oakland, California. But after being domesticated for a while, he decided that he wasn't done exploring yet. And in 1879, he took his first trip to Alaska, where, upon his arrival, he found Glacier Bay. After exploring Alaska for a while, John decided to come back to California. It was at this time that he met his wife, Louis Wanda Stretznall, and in 1880, he married her. Of course, he still wasn't done exploring. He took yet another trip to Alaska, and then after he arrived back in California, he and his wife moved to Martinez, California, where he went into business with his father-in-law, who was a fruit rancher. Together, he and Louis had two daughters named Wanda and Helen. He stayed there for 10 years to make sure that he could make enough money to provide for his family, and after doing so, he decided to go on yet again another exploration. This time, he decided to travel to Alaska, Australia, South America, Africa, Europe, China, Japan, and of course, continuous trips to the Sierra Nevada. As I said, John Muir's articles titled Studies in the Sierra helped kick off his career as a writer. And in 1889, John Muir wrote an article for Century magazine arguing that Yosemite Valley should be turned into a national park. Of course, John wrote many other articles for Century magazine, most of which describe the devastation that Sierra Nevada's forests and meadows were succumbing to due to herds of cattle and sheep plowing through the fields. See, when John wrote, he wrote with a certain spiritual quality that inspired presidents and congressmen alike. It was when he met his friend Robert Underwood Johnson, who was an editor for Century magazine, that they began to remedy some of the problems that John was noticing. And due to their efforts, in 1890, Congress finally made an act that turned Yosemite Valley into National Park. But of course, John Muir didn't just help to make Yosemite a national park. He also helped create the Sequoia National Park, Mount Rainier National Park, the Petrified Forest National Park, and of course the Grand Canyon National Park. After John Muir convinced Congress to create national parks, Robert Johnson presented him with an idea to develop an association to help protect these newly created areas. And in 1892, Muir and his associates created the Sierra Club. Of course, Muir was the president until his death in 1914. During his time in the Sierra Club, though, however, he and his associates wrote many articles fighting for the preservation of these national parks. Through these articles, they were able to win many battles. However, the most memorable battle ever fought that they actually lost was when they were trying to convince Congress not to allow the construction of the Hetch Hetchy Valley Reservoir. Of course, they lost, and the reservoir was built. But it did supply San Francisco with fresh water, but at a price that drowned Muir's once beloved Yosemite Valley. Throughout his life, John Muir accomplished outstanding things. He published over 300 articles. He wrote 10 major books that allowed him to share his adventures and really allowed him to open up and express his love for nature, which encouraged readers to not only explore the great outdoor themselves, but to also find their love for nature as well, in order to preserve it for future generations to come. One of his books, Our National Parks, actually caught the attention of Theodore Roosevelt. And in 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt went out and visited Muir, which he got to go on a hike and took a tour of Yosemite Valley. And after seeing the awe-inspiring scenery, he and Muir actually stood underneath the tall pine trees where they created ideas for conservation programs that are still in use today. With many articles and books, John helped pave the way for America's conservation movement. He was a great writer and naturalist of his time, and still continues to inspire environmentalists of our time. Sadly, he died in 1914 after visiting his daughter in Los Angeles, but he will forever live on in our hearts.